Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of Blackstone Financial Tower, her worn sneakers making soft, squeaking sounds against the polished floor. At 52, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Office workers rushed past her without a second glance, their expensive suits and clicking heels creating a symphony of importance that never included her. The 30-story building housed some of the city's most powerful financial firms, and Maria had been cleaning its offices for nearly 8 years. She knew every corner, every hidden camera, every security blind spot. Most importantly, she knew the people who worked there better than they knew themselves. Tonight felt different, though. As she emptied trash bins and wiped down conference tables on the 15th floor, Maria noticed unusual activity. Men in dark suits had been coming and going all week, speaking in hushed tones and carrying briefcases that seemed too important for their contents. These weren't the usual investment bankers or accountants. These men moved differently, with the careful awareness of people who had seen real danger. Maria had learned to read people during her previous life, before she became invisible, before she chose to disappear into the world of night shift cleaning. The skills never left you, no matter how hard you tried to bury them. She was dusting the reception desk when she overheard 2 security guards talking near the elevators. "Did you see those guys who came in today? Something big is going down. Word is there's going to be some kind of meeting tomorrow night after hours." "What kind of meeting?" the younger guard asked. "The kind where regular security gets sent home early," his partner replied grimly. Maria continued her work, but her mind was racing. In her 8 years here, she had never seen regular security dismissed. The building's night security was minimal anyway, just 2 guards who mostly watched monitors and made hourly rounds. If they were being sent home, it meant someone wanted complete privacy. As she moved through the offices, Maria's trained eyes picked up details others would miss. New phone lines had been installed in the corner office of Meridian Holdings. The company's CEO, Jonathan Blackwood, had been working late every night this week, something he never did before. His assistant had been shredding documents non-stop, and Maria had noticed the unusual amount of paper in the confidential disposal bins. Around midnight, as Maria was cleaning the executive washroom, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly stepped into a supply closet and peered through the crack in the door. 3 men walked past, their conversation echoing in the empty corridor. "Everything needs to be cleaned tomorrow night," one said in accented English. "No witnesses, no complications." "What about the cleaning lady?" another asked. "She's here every night," the first man laughed coldly. "She's nobody, just an old woman who empties trash cans. She won't even notice what's happening." Maria's blood ran cold, not from fear but from the familiar anger that rose when people underestimated her. She had spent years cultivating this invisible persona, but sometimes she forgot how completely she had succeeded. After the men left, Maria finished her rounds quickly. She had developed habits over the years that served her well now. Every night she memorized which offices had lights on, which computers were left running, and which doors were locked that usually weren't. Tonight, she noticed that the Meridian Holdings suite had additional locks installed, and security cameras that hadn't been there the week before. Back in the janitor's closet that served as her base of operations, Maria sat among the mops and cleaning supplies and allowed herself to think. She had left her old life behind for good reasons. The work she did now was honest, simple, and safe. She had a small apartment, a routine that kept her grounded, and the peace that came from being forgotten by the world that once knew her name. But tomorrow night, something was going to happen in this building, something that required sending away witnesses and installing extra security, something that made dangerous men feel confident, enough to discuss murder in hallways because they assumed the cleaning lady was deaf and stupid. Maria Santos had been many things in her life before she became invisible. She had been a federal agent for 15 years, specializing in financial crimes and international money laundering. She had worked undercover in organizations that most people only read about in newspapers. She had testified before Congress and received commendations from 3 different directors. But that was before everything went wrong. Before her partner was killed and she barely escaped with her life. Before she realized that some of the people she had trusted were the same ones trying to have her eliminated. Before she made the hardest decision of her life and disappeared completely, letting the world believe that Agent Maria Santos had died in a car accident in Mexico. For 8 years, she had been just a janitor. For 8 years, she had successfully stayed hidden. But as she sat in that closet, surrounded by the tools of her humble trade, Maria felt the familiar pull of her old instincts. Whatever was happening tomorrow night in this building was big enough to warrant extreme measures. The men she had overheard spoke with the confidence of people who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. And they were planning something that required absolute privacy in a building full of financial firms. Maria looked at her calloused hands and her simple uniform. Tomorrow night she had a choice to make. She could finish her shift and go home, maintaining the safe, invisible life she had built. Or she could dust off skills she had hoped never to use again, and find out what was worth killing for in the marble halls of Blackstone Financial Tower. As she locked up her supplies and headed for the exit, Maria Santos made her decision. Tomorrow night, 3 armed men were going to discover that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone overlooks. The quiet janitor they dismissed would teach them why. Underestimating people could be a fatal mistake. The next evening, Maria arrived for work an hour earlier than usual. She had spent the day researching Meridian Holdings and Jonathan Blackwood, using skills and resources she hadn't touched in years. What she found confirmed her suspicions that something major was happening. Meridian Holdings was connected to several shell companies with ties to international banking. Blackwood himself had been under investigation by the Treasury Department 2 years ago, though nothing had come of it. The company handled transactions for clients who preferred anonymity, the kind of service that attracted both legitimate privacy seekers and money launderers. Maria entered the building through the service entrance as usual, nodding to the security guard who barely looked up from his magazine. She had perfected the art of being forgettable, wearing the same style of clothes every night, and maintaining the same quiet demeanor that made people's eyes slide past her. But tonight, she carried more than cleaning supplies. Hidden in her cart, beneath the false bottom she had installed years ago during her paranoid early days of hiding, were items from her past life, a small camera, recording equipment, and other tools that a former federal agent might find useful. As she began her rounds on the lower floors, Maria noticed the building felt different. Security was indeed lighter than usual, just as the guards had mentioned. Only one guard remained at the main desk, and he seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking toward the elevators. Around 9 o'clock, Maria witnessed the first unusual arrival. A black sedan pulled up to the building's rear entrance, and 3 men got out. She recognized one of them from the previous night, the one who had spoken about no witnesses. They entered through a service door that was supposed to be locked after 6 p.m. Maria made her way to the 15th floor, where Meridian Holdings occupied the corner suite. The hallway was empty, but she could see light coming from under the office doors. As she cleaned nearby, she heard multiple voices speaking in different languages. She recognized Russian, Arabic, and what sounded like Portuguese. Using her old training, Maria positioned her cleaning cart to block the view from the main hallway while she worked near the office doors. The conversations inside were heated, involving large numbers and what sounded like territorial disputes. Every instinct she had developed over 15 years in federal service told her this was exactly the kind of meeting that preceded violence. At 10:30, more cars arrived. Maria watched from a window as men in expensive suits entered the building. These weren't the same dangerous-looking individuals from earlier. These men looked like businessmen, the kind who might legitimately have reasons to meet after hours about financial matters. But Maria noticed they all arrived separately and used different entrances. As she continued her work, Maria began to piece together what was happening. The early arrivals were enforcers, the muscle brought in to ensure the meeting went smoothly. The later arrivals were the actual participants, probably representatives from different criminal organizations looking to legitimize their money through Blackwood's company. Around 11 o'clock, everything changed. Maria was cleaning near the elevator when she heard shouting from the Meridian Holdings suite. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. Gunshots. 3 quick pops followed by silence. Maria's training kicked in automatically. Instead of running, she moved toward the danger, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Whatever had just happened, people might need help, and she was possibly the only person in the building with the skills to provide it. As she approached the suite, she could hear agitated voices. The door was slightly open and she could see inside. Two men lay motionless on the conference room floor. Jonathan Blackwood was standing against the wall with his hands raised, while one of the armed men from earlier held a gun to his head. "Where is it?" the gunman was demanding. "You said the shipment would be here tonight." "I don't know what you're talking about," Blackwood stammered. "The meeting was just about investment opportunities." Maria realized she was witnessing a robbery gone wrong, or perhaps a double cross between criminal partners. Either way, Blackwood was about to die, and she was the only witness. She had two choices: slip away and call the police from a safe distance, or intervene directly. But calling the police would take time, and Blackwood didn't have time. More importantly, Maria realized that if she called the authorities, her own identity would come under scrutiny. After 8 years of careful anonymity, she couldn't risk exposure. As she watched, a second gunman emerged from an inner office, speaking rapidly in Russian to his partner. Maria understood enough to know they were discussing killing Blackwood and searching the building for something valuable. They mentioned a cleaning lady, wondering if she had seen anything. "Find her," the first gunman ordered. "We can't leave any witnesses." Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once made her one of the Bureau's most effective agents. She had hoped never to feel it again, but as she watched dangerous men plan murder, her old instincts took over. Moving silently, she retrieved items from her cleaning cart. The small camera went into the air vent where it could record everything. The pepper spray she had carried for 8 years as a precaution went into her pocket. And from the hidden compartment, she took out a device she had hoped never to use again. Maria Santos, the janitor, was about to disappear, replaced by someone far more dangerous. But first she needed to even the odds. 3 armed men had made the mistake of assuming she was helpless. They were about to learn why that assumption would be their last. As she prepared to act, Maria felt a strange sense of completion. For 8 years she had run from her past, trying to live a quiet life away from violence and danger. But tonight her 2 lives were about to collide, and the men who had dismissed her as just the cleaning lady were going to discover exactly who Maria Santos really was. The game was about to begin, and this time, she would be playing by rules they had never encountered. Maria moved through the darkened hallways with the silent precision of someone trained in covert operations. 8 years of cleaning these offices had given her an advantage the gunman couldn't imagine. She knew every corner, every blind spot, every way in and out of the building. First, she needed to isolate them. Moving to the main electrical panel in the service corridor, Maria systematically shut off power to different sections of the 15th floor. The Meridian Holdings suite remained lit, but the surrounding offices plunged into darkness. This would force the gunmen to stay where they were while limiting their visibility if they tried to search for her. Next, she used the building's intercom system to create confusion. Speaking in a disguised voice through the cleaning staff communication channel, she reported a security breach on the 20th floor to the remaining security guard downstairs. She knew he would investigate, leaving her free to work without interruption. Back near the Meridian Holdings suite, Maria could hear the gunmen arguing. The power outage had made them nervous, and they were debating whether to kill Blackwood immediately and flee, or continue searching for whatever they had come to steal. Through the crack in the door, Maria observed their positions. The leader stood near Blackwood by the windows. The second gunman was searching through filing cabinets in the inner office. A third man, whom she hadn't seen before, was guarding the main entrance to the suite. Maria had dealt with similar situations during her federal career, but never alone and never without backup. This time she was operating entirely on her own, using nothing but her wits and the element of surprise. She began with psychological warfare. Using her phone, she called the suite's main number. When the third gunman answered, she spoke in perfect Russian. "This building is surrounded. You have 5 minutes to surrender before we come in." The effect was immediate. She could hear rapid conversation as the gunman tried to figure out who had called and how someone knew they were there. The psychological pressure was exactly what she wanted. Confused, frightened criminals made mistakes. While they argued, Maria made her first move. She had noticed that the suite's ventilation system was accessible through a maintenance panel in the adjacent office. Years of watching the building's maintenance staff had taught her the layout of the air ducts. Crawling through the ductwork with the silence born of extensive training, Maria positioned herself above the inner office where the second gunman was searching. She could see him through the ceiling vent, frantically going through files and computer drives. Maria had brought a small canister of industrial cleaning solvent from her cart. When heated, it produced thick, disorienting smoke. She attached a timer device to the canister and dropped it through the vent into the office below. Within minutes, white smoke began pouring from the inner office. The second gunman stumbled out, coughing and temporarily blinded. This was Maria's chance. She dropped through the ceiling tiles directly behind him, landing silently on the carpeted floor. Before he could react, she had applied a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds. 1 down, 2 to go. The smoke had alerted the other gunmen who were now shouting for their partner. Maria quickly searched the unconscious man, taking his weapon and communication device. Through his earpiece, she could hear the leader demanding to know what was happening. Instead of responding, Maria used the earpiece to her advantage. Speaking in accented English to match the gunman's voice, she reported, "Police are in the building. We need to evacuate now." The reaction was immediate panic. Through the smoke-filled doorway, Maria could see the leader grabbing Blackwood and moving toward the exit, while the third gunman provided cover. But Maria had anticipated this. While crawling through the ducts, she had also accessed the building's fire safety system. Now she triggered the emergency lockdown protocol for the 15th floor. Heavy security doors slammed shut at both ends of the hallway, trapping everyone in the Meridian holding section. The gunmen were now caught between the smoke-filled office behind them and the locked security doors ahead. Maria could hear them arguing about their options, their voices tight with stress. She used this moment to check on Blackwood. The businessman was clearly terrified but uninjured. Through hand signals, Maria indicated that he should stay low and quiet. His eyes widened when he realized the cleaning lady was somehow orchestrating a rescue, but survival instinct kept him silent. The leader was now desperate, firing shots at the security doors in an attempt to break them open. But these doors were designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Each shot only made him more frustrated and less rational. Maria knew she needed to end this quickly. The sound of gunfire would eventually attract police attention, and she couldn't afford to be present when authorities arrived. Her identity had to remain secret. Using the building's public address system, she spoke directly to the remaining gunman. "You are trapped. Your partner is unconscious. Your exit routes are sealed. You have one choice: surrender now, or face the consequences." The leader's response was to fire several shots in the direction of the speakers, revealing his position near the conference room windows. This was the opening Maria needed. She had one advantage these men couldn't match. She knew exactly how the building's systems worked. Every window in the Meridian holding suite was equipped with automated blinds connected to the central computer system. With precise timing, Maria triggered the blinds to close and open rapidly, creating a strobing effect that was disorienting in the semi-darkness. At the same time, she activated the building's emergency lighting system, causing bright red lights to flash throughout the suite. Confused and overwhelmed by the sensory chaos, the third gunman made a critical mistake. He moved away from his position to help his leader, leaving Maria a clear path to approach from behind. She struck swiftly and silently, using pressure points she had learned years ago to render him unconscious before he could raise an alarm. 2 down, 1 to go. Now only the leader remained, still holding Blackwood at gunpoint but clearly rattled by the systematic elimination of his team. Maria could hear him speaking rapidly into his phone, probably calling for backup or extraction. But backup wouldn't arrive in time. Maria Santos had spent 8 years perfecting the art of invisibility, but she hadn't forgotten how to be dangerous. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the man who had dismissed her as just a cleaning lady was about to learn why that had been a fatal mistake. The fight was brutal and desperate. The leader had the advantage of size and strength, but Maria had something more valuable: 8 years of suppressed anger at being forced to hide, to diminish herself, to pretend to be helpless, while watching the world continue around her. Every punch she threw carried the weight of every night she had emptied trash cans while remembering when she had been hunting international criminals. Every defensive move reflected the frustration of being invisible when she had once commanded respect from dangerous people across the globe. They crashed through the conference room, overturning chairs and shattering the large table. The leader was trying to reach one of the unconscious gunman's weapons, but Maria stayed between him and any escape route. She had learned long ago that trapped animals fight hardest, but they also make the most mistakes. As they grappled near the windows, Maria realized she had one advantage he couldn't match. She knew this building better than anyone. Every surface, every angle, every structural detail was familiar to her. When he lunged toward her, she sidestepped and let his momentum carry him into the reinforced window. As he bounced off the glass, Maria struck with a combination she had learned in federal training, targeting pressure points that would disable without killing. But the leader was tougher than most criminals she had faced. Instead of dropping, he grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from Blackwood's desk and swung it at her head. Maria barely ducked in time, feeling the wind from the improvised weapon ruffle her hair. The paperweight shattered against the wall behind her, sending glass fragments across the floor. Both fighters were breathing hard now, circling each other like prize fighters in the final round. "You should have stayed invisible, cleaning lady," the leader gasped. "Now you're going to die for interfering." "I've been dead for 8 years," Maria replied grimly. "Tonight I'm finally alive again." They closed again, and this time Maria used every trick she had learned in 15 years of dangerous work. She feinted left, then struck right, using his expectations against him. When he moved to block her obvious attack, she was already hitting him from an unexpected angle. The leader staggered but didn't fall. Blood was running from his nose, but his eyes remained focused and dangerous. Maria realized she was fighting someone with professional training, possibly military or intelligence background. As they circled again, she heard something that made her blood run cold: sirens in the distance. Someone had reported the gunshots and police were responding. Maria had perhaps 5 minutes before the building was surrounded. She couldn't be here when they arrived. Too many questions would be asked, and her carefully constructed identity would crumble under official scrutiny. 8 years of hiding would be wasted, and the people who had tried to kill her before would learn she was still alive. Desperation gave her speed. As the leader charged again, Maria dropped to the floor and swept his legs, sending him crashing into the overturned conference table. Before he could recover, she had applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain. He struggled violently, but Maria held on with the determination of someone whose life depended on it. After what seemed like hours but was probably 30 seconds, the leader went limp in her arms. Maria quickly checked his pulse. Unconscious but alive, just like his partners. She had successfully neutralized 3 armed criminals without killing any of them, something that would have seemed impossible when the night began. But now came the hardest part: disappearing again. Moving quickly, Maria gathered evidence from the scene. The hidden camera she had planted was still recording, capturing everything that had happened. She retrieved it and the other equipment she had used, erasing any trace of her involvement. The unconscious gunman's weapons went into her cleaning cart, along with any other evidence that might complicate the official investigation. She needed this to look like the criminals had been defeated by persons unknown, not by a supposedly dead federal agent working as a janitor. Blackwood was still unconscious, but breathing normally. Maria checked him for injuries and found none serious. He would have a story to tell, but he had never gotten a clear look at her face in the chaos of the fight. As she worked, Maria's mind was already planning her next moves. The building's security cameras would show the cleaning lady entering and leaving at her normal times. The emergency lockdown would be attributed to a system malfunction triggered by the smoke. The unconscious criminals would be assumed to have turned on each other or been defeated by some rival criminal group. The sirens were getting closer. Maria took one last look around the destroyed office, seeing it now not as the scene of a victory, but as the end of the quiet life she had built. There was no going back. Too much had happened and too many people would be asking questions. Even if she could maintain her cover story, the adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, reminding her of who she really was. For 8 years, she had been running from her past. Tonight, her past had caught up with her in a way she never expected. Not through the corruption that had driven her into hiding, but through her own unwillingness to watch innocent people suffer. As Maria Santos, the janitor, made her final exit from Blackstone Financial Tower, she was already becoming someone else. The question was, who would she become next? The police would find 3 unconscious criminals, evidence of a money laundering operation and a hostage who had been saved by mysterious circumstances. They would never know that their anonymous hero was already disappearing into the night, leaving behind 8 years of carefully constructed invisibility. But Maria knew that invisibility was no longer an option. Tonight had changed everything, and there was no going back to the simple life of cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. Tomorrow, Maria Santos would have to decide who she wanted to be for the rest of her life. The leader was trapped and he knew it. Maria could hear him breathing heavily as he pressed his gun against Blackwood's temple, using the businessman as a human shield while trying to figure out what had happened to his carefully planned operation. "I know you're out there," he called out in accented English. "Show yourself or I kill him now." Maria remained silent, moving carefully around the perimeter of the suite. Through years of experience, she had learned that silence was often more terrifying to criminals than threats. Let him imagine what kind of force was arrayed against him. The strobing lights and intermittent smoke had created an environment of chaos. But Maria moved through it like she belonged there. She knew exactly where every piece of furniture stood, where every shadow fell, and how sound traveled through these rooms. The leader made his next mistake by moving toward the windows, probably hoping to use them as an escape route. But Maria had planned for this too. These windows didn't open, and the glass was reinforced for safety. He was effectively cornered. As he struggled with the window locks, Maria got her first close look at him. Tall, heavily built, with the kind of facial scars that suggested a long history of violence. This wasn't some desperate amateur. This was a professional killer who had likely eliminated many people who underestimated him. But tonight he was the one doing the underestimating. Maria activated the building's security cameras and began recording everything. If she couldn't stay to give testimony, she could at least ensure there was evidence of what had happened. The cameras would show a terrorist attack foiled by person or persons unknown. "Who are you?" the leader shouted into the darkness. "Police? FBI? Show me your badge." Maria smiled grimly. If only he knew how close he was to the truth. Instead of answering, she began psychological pressure again. Using the building's sound system, she played back the recording she had made of his earlier conversation about killing witnesses. His own voice filled the suite. "Everything needs to be clean tomorrow night. No witnesses, no complications." The effect was immediate. He spun around trying to locate the source of the sound, his gun hand shaking slightly. Hearing your own words played back by an unknown enemy was deeply unsettling. "What do you want?" he called out. This time Maria answered, but she disguised her voice by speaking through a maintenance phone that added electronic distortion. "Justice." One word, but it carried the weight of all her years in law enforcement. For 8 years she had run from the corruption that had destroyed her career and nearly killed her. Tonight, she was remembering why she had become an agent in the first place. The leader was now desperate enough to make critical errors. He dragged Blackwood toward the main door, apparently forgetting that it was sealed by the emergency lockdown. When he realized his mistake, his frustration boiled over. "Open these doors or I start shooting hostages," he screamed. Maria had anticipated this threat. From her position in the shadows, she could see that Blackwood was barely conscious from fear and stress. The businessman was more liability than asset to the gunman now. She decided to force the final confrontation. Using her knowledge of the building's electrical system, Maria shut off all the lights in the suite except for one spotlight that illuminated the area near the sealed door. The leader and Blackwood were caught in the bright circle like actors on a stage. Then, stepping partially into view but remaining in the shadows, Maria spoke in her normal voice for the first time. "Let him go. You're outnumbered and trapped. This is your only chance to surrender." The leader squinted into the darkness, trying to see her clearly. "You're just one person. I can hear it in your voice, just one woman." "One is enough," Maria replied calmly. For a moment, they stared at each other across the smoke-filled room. The leader saw a middle-aged cleaning lady in a simple uniform. Maria saw a killer who had underestimated his opponent for the last time. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled. "Actually," Maria said, stepping fully into the light, "I think it's you who has no idea." The transformation was subtle, but complete. Gone was the submissive posture and hesitant movements of the cleaning lady. In their place stood someone with the bearing of a trained professional, someone comfortable with danger and violence. The leader's eyes widened slightly as he realized that the woman facing him was not who she appeared to be. But his training kept the gun steady on Blackwood. "Who are you really?" he demanded. Maria considered telling him the truth, that she was former Special Agent Maria Santos, who had spent 15 years hunting people exactly like him, that she had infiltrated criminal organizations from Moscow to Mexico City, that she had been presumed dead for 8 years while living in hiding after exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. Instead, she simply said, "Someone who's tired of watching people like you hurt innocent people." The standoff continued for several more seconds. The leader was calculating odds, probably wondering if he could shoot Blackwood and turn the gun on Maria before she could stop him. Maria was calculating too, measuring distances and angles, planning her next move. The decision came when Blackwood suddenly collapsed, apparently fainting from stress and terror. As the businessman fell, the leader's attention flickered for just an instant. That instant was all Maria needed. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had practiced combat scenarios thousands of times. The pepper spray came out first, creating a cloud that temporarily blinded the gunman. As he staggered backward, firing wildly, Maria closed the distance between them. The disarming technique was textbook perfect, using his own momentum against him as she twisted his gun hand and struck nerve points that made his fingers release involuntarily. The weapon clattered across the floor into the darkness. But the leader was stronger than Maria had expected, and desperation made him dangerous. They grappled in the confined space, knocking over furniture and crashing into walls. His training was different from hers, more brutal and less refined, but effective. Maria realized this wasn't going to be a quick victory. This man had survived in a world where weakness meant death, and he wasn't going to surrender easily. She needed to end this fight quickly, before backup arrived or her own strength gave out. The final exchange would test everything she had learned in her years as an agent, and everything she had tried to forget during her years as a janitor. 3 weeks later, Maria Santos sat in a small cafe in Portland, Oregon, reading newspaper coverage of what the media had dubbed the Blackstone Tower mystery. The official story was that 3 armed criminals had attempted to rob a financial firm but were somehow disabled by unknown persons. Jonathan Blackwood had survived with no clear memory of who had rescued him, describing only shadows and smoke during his ordeal. The FBI had taken over the investigation, discovering that Meridian Holdings was indeed a front for international money laundering. They had recovered evidence of transactions worth over $50 million, leading to arrests in 6 countries. Blackwood was cooperating with authorities in exchange for immunity, providing details about clients and operations he had previously kept secret. Maria smiled grimly at the irony. She had spent years building cases like this during her federal career, but tonight she had accomplished more in a few hours than months of traditional investigation might have achieved. The difference was that this time, she had been willing to operate outside the system that had betrayed her. Her old life as a janitor was gone forever. She had left Portland 3 days after the incident, using emergency protocols she had established years earlier. New identification, new appearance, new background story. The woman who had cleaned floors at Blackstone Tower had vanished as completely as Special Agent Maria Santos had 8 years before. But this time was different. This time she wasn't running from her past. She was choosing her future. The skills that had made her an effective federal agent hadn't disappeared during her years in hiding. If anything, the experience of being invisible had taught her new techniques for gathering information and moving undetected. She had become something that didn't exist in law enforcement training, a ghost who could fight back. Over the past weeks, Maria had been researching similar situations across the country. Financial crimes that law enforcement couldn't touch because of jurisdictional issues, political complications, or simple lack of resources. Victims who had no recourse through official channels. Criminals who operated with impunity because they understood how to work around the system. She had found her new calling. The first case had come to her attention through news reports. A pension fund theft in Detroit where workers had lost their retirement savings to a scheme involving shell companies and offshore accounts. The FBI was investigating, but the complexity of the case meant it would take years to resolve, if ever. Meanwhile, the perpetrators were living comfortably on stolen money while their victims faced poverty. Maria had spent 2 weeks researching the case, using databases and contacts she wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. What she found was a network of corruption that extended into local government and involved at least 3 major financial institutions. The beauty of being officially dead was that she could operate without the constraints that limited legitimate investigators. No warrant requirements, no jurisdictional boundaries, no bureaucratic oversight. She could go places and do things that federal agents only dreamed about. Her first intervention had been surgical and effective. Key evidence mysteriously appeared in prosecutors' offices. Critical witnesses suddenly became willing to testify. Bank records that had been accidentally destroyed were somehow recovered from supposedly secure deletion. Within days, the entire scheme had unraveled, leading to arrests and the recovery of most of the stolen pension funds. The media had attributed the breakthrough to anonymous tips and excellent detective work by local authorities. Maria had watched the coverage from a distance, feeling the satisfaction of justice served without the complications of official recognition. Now she was planning her next case, a human trafficking operation that used legitimate businesses as fronts. The FBI had been watching them for months but couldn't get enough evidence for prosecutions. Too many witnesses were afraid to testify, and too many officials were being paid to look the other way. Maria understood that what she was doing existed in a legal gray area. She wasn't a vigilante seeking revenge, but she wasn't exactly law enforcement either. She was something new, a professional who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, using the skills of both to achieve justice when the system failed. The work was dangerous, but danger had never frightened Maria Santos. What had frightened her was helplessness, the feeling that she couldn't make a difference. For 8 years, she had felt powerless, watching the world's problems from the sidelines while pretending to be someone she wasn't. Now she was making a difference again, but on her own terms. She chose her cases carefully, targeting situations where traditional law enforcement was ineffective. She worked alone, trusting no one and leaving no traces, and she never stayed anywhere long enough to establish the kind of routine that had made her previous life as a janitor possible. It wasn't the life she had planned when she faked her death 8 years ago. Then she had simply wanted to survive and disappear. Now, she wanted to use her survival to help others who couldn't help themselves. As she finished reading the newspaper coverage of the Blackstone case, Maria reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. 3 armed criminals had dismissed her as just the janitor, never imagining that their biggest mistake would be underestimating someone who had spent years perfecting the art of being overlooked. They had assumed she was helpless because she appeared ordinary. They had assumed she was insignificant because she was invisible. They had assumed she would be too frightened to interfere with their plans. All of those assumptions had been wrong, and now they were serving lengthy prison sentences while their victims were safe. Maria Santos had learned something important that night in Blackstone Tower. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone ignores. Sometimes justice comes from the shadows, delivered by someone who officially doesn't exist. She closed the newspaper and left the cafe, already planning her next move. Somewhere there were criminals who thought they were safe because they understood how to work around the law. Somewhere there were victims who had given up hope because the system had failed them. They were about to learn that justice didn't always wear a badge or work through official channels. Sometimes it looked like an ordinary cleaning lady who turned out to be anything but ordinary. The woman who had once been Special Agent Maria Santos walked into the crowd and disappeared, becoming invisible once again. But this time she was invisible by choice, and her invisibility was a weapon that criminals would learn to fear. The janitor was gone forever, but something far more dangerous had taken her place.